The Key to the Indian by Lynne Reid Banks. Chapter 10. The Girl Who Was Gillon. If Omri had for one moment expected to see Gillon staring at him from under a girl puppet's headscarf, if he had stopped for a second to think it possible that his brother might have come back with the knapsack he was leaning on in the car, he would have expected him to be looking totally terrified, baffled, gobsmacked. But he wasn't. His eyes were narrowed, his mouth was tight, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated fury. "I knew it!" he ground out between clenched teeth. "I knew you were behind this somehow." Omri's mouth dropped open. "I've been sitting here," Gillon continued, "in this ridiculous girly gear, just waiting for you to turn up to laugh your arse off. Do you know how hard it was, just getting those stupid strings unknotted? Did you have to get one tangled up in my bloody hair? You know what? I have always known there was something really spooky going on with you. Don't think you had me fooled, so go on, surprise me. How did you do it? Hypnosis, that's it, isn't it? You've been secretly studying hypnotism, or it's something to do with that cupboard. I just knew you'd use it to play some stinking trick on me one day. Well, don't just sit there. If you could see yourself. Get those stupid strings off. You look like a total dork in those harem pants and that fancy blouse. No, don't say it. I know I look even more daft, dressed up in a skirt." Excuse me. "Whatever this thing is." "It's sorry," croaked Omri. It's very pretty. You look a real dish." He dissolved into hysterical laughter, tried to stand up, tripped over his leg strings, and fell over on the rope bed so hard he got his head stuck in one of the gaps. "Oh no! Pull me up!" he choked, trying to free himself, getting more and more helplessly enmeshed. "I'm stuck!" Gillon stood up on the ropes, grabbed Omri by his head string, and yanked him ungently free. He clearly did not share the joke. "When I wake up from my trance," he said grimly, or whatever, I am going to make sure your buns get stuck in the nearest barbed wire fence. Now jack it in and tell me what you're playing at and how you pulled this off." Omri lay back, hiccuping. He wrenched the strings off his wrists and knees and struggled with the one tangled in his hair. He tried really hard to get control, but every time he looked up through his tears at Gillon, standing there in his glamorous Indian get-up, with a face of thunder under the silver-brocaded headscarf. He had to stifle explosions of mirth. At last, Gillon gave him a sharp kick in the rear with his turned-up-toed shoe. As he did, his other foot slipped through a hole in the mattress, and he dropped through like the Demon King in a pantomime. Omri became completely helpless, wheezing and choking with laughter. "Stop it, you idiot!" Gillon hissed, trying to haul himself out. "Where are we, and what's Dad, and where's Dad, and what's the story?" Omri heaved himself upright as well as he could and gave Gillon a hand. "Well, it's not a trick. I can't explain it all now, but the fact is we're back in the past. That man who brought me in is our great-grandfather, Mum's granddad. We're in India." "India? Granddad, the past. I should have guessed," said Gillon sarcastically. He looked down at himself. "And is it really me inside this fancy dress? I mean, I haven't turned into a girl, have I?" Omri could feel his hysterics coming back. "Maybe you'd better check," he wheezed. Gillon checked and breathed a sigh of relief. "So why am I dressed like one?" "That doll was probably the only toy near at hand when you got here," Omri said. "You are being really helpful. Exactly how did I get here?" "The knapsack brought you." The knapsack? I'm trying so hard not to kill you. All right, I'll bite. How did the knapsack bring me?" "You were touching it in the car when Dad turned the key." "It was the key that was magic." At this point, Gillon lost it completely. "Magic? Are you mad? Don't tell me you believe in magic." Omri felt exasperated at such obtuseness. "Gilly, look around you. This is real. We've traveled through time. We're small. We've brought two puppets to life. Of course it's magic. Just get your mind around it." Gillon's face sagged. He stared at him. Then he sat down rather suddenly on the ropes. His feet dangled through 2 holes, and he clutched a strand of rope with each hand. He seemed to need to hold on to something. "You've accepted that you're now a puppet 9 inches high," said Omri quietly. "Is it so much harder to accept magic?" Gillon said, after a bit, in quite a different voice, "I'm scared, I'm so scared." "Don't be. It doesn't help. We really are small, aren't we? I mean, look at this bed. It's like a football field with holes. And that man, blimey, I just closed my eyes when he came in. I didn't look properly. I didn't let myself. A giant great-grandfather." His face crumpled. Gillon, who Omri hadn't seen cry since he was about 8. Omri crawled over to him across the ropes. He put his arm around his brother's shoulders. "Don't. It's okay. Dad'll bring us back. We're quite safe," he said with confidence he didn't completely feel. "Safe? What if that giant notices we're real? What if anybody does?" "They won't hurt us." "You're kidding. It'll be like Pinocchio and Stromboli." "This is a storeroom. Nobody probably comes in here. We'll be left in peace in here until Dad..." To give lie to this confusing assurance, the door to the room opened and 2 children came in. Omri twisted his head and gave them one terrified look. They were like the ones in the square who had tried to touch and handle him. "Flop," muttered Omri, and flopped. After a stunned second, Gillon did the same, but it was too late. The children had seen. Unfortunately, Omri had flopped with his head turned away, so he had to use his ears to determine what was happening. There was an excited buzz of whispering. He heard the faint sound of small bare feet crossing the floor. Then he sensed something warm hanging over him, hesitating. A hand. It touched him. It felt him, turned him over. He almost fainted from the feeling of powerlessness. All the defense he could think of was to freeze, to stretch his eyes, trying to look like a painted puppet, but it was useless. 2 pairs of sharp young eyes were examining him from about a foot away. They were much wider open than his own. A brown, grubby finger poked his cheek and his stomach and was snatched away. The children, a boy and a girl, looked at each other. The boy said something. Then he reached over and gingerly picked up Gillon. Gillon didn't bother trying to look like a puppet. He sprang the life of the boy's hands, struggling, clawing, and kicking. The boy held on until Gillon, turning his head, bit his hand. At that, the boy dropped him back on the bed and jumped backwards with a yell. Gillon bounced away and then struggled to crawl away. The girl, who only looked about 6, ran to the door with her hands over her ears, uttering a wail of fear. The boy sprang after her, slammed the door shut, grabbed the girl, and gave her a good shake. Then he took her by the arm and dragged her back to the bed, telling her off all the way. Omri could well imagine what he was saying. "Don't make a noise, stupid. Someone will come. Let's find out about this for ourselves." It's just what anyone would say, anyone with a bit of sense. An argument ensued, which the boy, who was a few years older than his little sister, won. Meanwhile, Omri and Gillon were as far away as they could get on the mattress, pressed against the wall, clinging to each other. Omri managed to whisper to Gillon, "It's okay. They'll probably just play with us. Don't fight them. Don't frighten them." "Me frighten them?" said Gillon between clenched teeth. The boy let go of the girl and squared up to Gillon. He said something to him, a question, of course in Hindi, but it was strange. Omri could guess what he was saying, because this, or something very like it, had happened to him. "He's saying, 'Let me pick you up,'" he said to Gillon. "How do you know?" "Well, wouldn't you? Nod to him and tell him to be gentle." Gillon threw him a look, but he nodded to the boy and put his hands out in front of him, palms down, and made a gently gesture. His hands were shaking. The boy reached out carefully, ready to snatch back his hand if Gillon turned fierce again. He put it round Gillon's waist. He lifted him very slowly until Gillon's face was level with his. Gillon pushed his headscarf off his head and said in a deep voice, "Hello, I'm a boy, a guy, a bloke." He showed off his biceps, but unfortunately the Indian boy thought he was threatening him and thrust him suddenly and sickeningly away from him at arm's length. "It's all right," called Omri. "He just wants you to know he's a sahib." The 2 children looked at him swiftly. "Sahib?" the boy said, and looked back at Gillon. "Mem sahib." Omri shook his head hard. "No, sahib." The boy scowled under his black brows. He seemed to make up his mind. He handed Gillon abruptly to his sister. She nearly dropped him. But he snapped an order at her. She looked at him fearfully, then looked at Gillon. Her face softened. She squeezed him gently, climbing onto the bed, sat cross-legged and began to take Gillon's clothes off. "No, no, stop it, you can't, I'm a fellow, I tell you, leave me alone," shouted Gillon at the top of his very small lungs. He twisted and jerked and fought, but it was no use. The girl took the end of the sari in her right hand and flicked Gillon away from her. He rolled off the edge of the bed and fell on the floor, the long piece of silk unwinding swiftly, somewhat breaking his fall. He twitched it to free the last bit, leaving Gillon flat on his back, in a little red blouse, his Turkish slippers, and nothing else at all other than a tape tied tightly around his waist. He clutched himself modestly and drew up his knees. "This is the worst," he muttered furiously, but it wasn't, because the boy now picked him up and gazed at him in astonishment. The girl, too. They both looked at Omri. "Mem Sahib?" the girl asked. "No, no, I'm a Sahib too," Omri hastened to say, repeating the biceps gesture. "Boy like you," he pointed. "Not like you," he added, shaking his head and pointing at the girl. The two children looked at each other and burst out laughing. She picked up the sari and, laying Gillon on one end of it, began rolling him back into it. She had barely finished carefully tucking it into the waist tape, when suddenly there came